formally welcome everybody to the Watershed Solutions Network workshop on multi-benefit land repurposing. Again, if you joined late, if you just make sure that you introduce yourself by making sure your name and location is identified in your screen, that would be great. We're going to have plenty of opportunity as this workshop develops for discussion and Q&A from all of you. So please feel free to participate when you're invited to do so. I'll start with an introduction of myself. My name is David Orth. I'm a longtime water wonk in California. Started in 1986 in water agency management, finance, and then policy. Ultimately, got involved in the development of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And then for the last 10 years, I've just been consulting and helping parties understand what the act means to various businesses, investments, and policy. I'm a member of the Watershed Solutions Network Board of Directors and past member of the California Water Data Consortium and California Water Commission. So real great opportunity to be here today and looking forward to this discussion. I think before we get going, Angelica is going to provide kind of an overview of the Watershed Solutions Network for those of you who might not be completely familiar. So Angelica, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you for being here today as our MC. But hello, everybody. I am Angelica Dow, the program director here at Watershed Solutions Network, and we are so excited that you are joining us today for our workshop on MLRP. We have some wonderful speakers lined up, and we are looking forward to some really rich conversations happening today. So for those of you that are joining for the first time, just a quick background of who we are as Watershed Solutions Network is that we originally actually started as Water Solutions Network, running an intensive cohort model of about 25 mid-career professionals that came together for a 9-month program to build leadership skills, systems thinking, and collaborative capacity, all centered around equity. So we ran 5 of these cohort models, and now our network members are out there being change makers and driving change in conversations across water and land stewardship. I say that because a fun fact, 2 of our speakers today, Reyn and Abby, were together in cohort 4. So it's wonderful to have them reunited together today here on our panel. So as we evolved into Watershed Solutions Network, our focus is expanding and cultivating communities that equitably steward thriving watersheds and working across sectors and across jurisdictions to align human and natural systems at the watershed scale. And throughout our programmings, we included in this workshop series, we connect people, places, and policy. So today for our virtual workshop series, that has been something that we've launched within this year, has great momentum. We're tackling new topics each month. And just so you're aware, every month on the 4th Thursday of each month, we host these workshops. So be sure to put those on your calendars. Some of our past workshops have included talking about Prop 4, building collaborative capacity with beavers, the human right to water, and today we're excited to turn the lens onto MLRP. So before I hand it back to Dave to introduce our speakers today and get us kicked off, I do want to name some of our WSN values, and we invite you to honor them with us today. And that first one is being contextual confidentiality. Today you're going to hear some stories from a few different folks, and we invite you to take what you've learned here with you, but also hold other people's personal stories close. So if you'd like to share something or share someone's story, we ask that you please reach out to one of our staff members first so we can get you connected with them personally to ask permission to share their stories. Secondly, listen with curiosity, especially when something makes you uncomfortable or defensive. Sit with that feeling rather than pushing it away. That's often where we find growth happening. And so we like to think that we invite questions over debate and curiosity over conviction. And lastly, let's share our space in our breakouts. We will have the second hour in breakout sessions together, and we just ask you to be mindful and please make room for everyone voices to be heard. So with that, that's kind of my little spiel, and I'd like to just hand it back over to Dave and get us kicked off for today.
Thank you, Angelica. Appreciate that very much. And I think we're going to have plenty of opportunity for further discussion and recognition as things go on. I would like to start with just sharing excitement that we have three great speakers today. Reyn Akiona from Valley Eco, Abigail Hart from the Nature Conservancy, and Ivy McElroy from Environmental Defense Fund to kind of walk us through a conversation. Each of them have been very actively involved in both the development and implementation of land repurposing projects. And I think we're going to have a great presentation. I think we all know that MLRP, as Angelica referenced it, multi-benefit land repurposing, is a strategy that really kind of developed out of addressing the objectives of Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in California. And it creates a wide array of opportunities in watershed management. And I think we're going to have a really good opportunity to talk about some of those things, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities going forward. So we're going to start first with a sharing from each of the speakers. Each of them will provide a little bit of an overview from their perspective, after which we're going to transition into what we call a fishbowl exercise, where there will be a kind of a facilitated chat that I will try to draw the speakers through or lead the speakers through. After which we'll invite you all to provide some input, observations, and some questions, and we'll have a question and answer response period, probably till about through the first hour. So we'll be somewhere around 1 o'clock, maybe a little bit after 1. And then as Angelica mentioned, we'll be going into a breakout session to deal with some specific topics that we'd like breakout groups to respond to. And then we'll do a kind of a wrap up just a few minutes before the scheduled close at 2 o'clock. And I think the first step here would be, I'd like to invite Ivy, then Reyn, and then Abby to each introduce themselves, share with the participants in the workshop what you'd like them to know about you, and then we'll move on into the individual presentations. So Ivy?
Yeah, thanks, David. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Ivy McElroy, and I'm a senior analyst with the water team at Environmental Defense Fund. I'll share a little bit about my work and how it relates to MLRP later on, but I'm part of the statewide support entity, which helps support MLRP grantees. We host monthly meetings and we just serve as hosting technical assistance for them and kind of being the intermediary between them and the Department of Conservation. I'll share more about that later, but that's kind of how my work in MLRP started, and I am based in Oakland, California. And it's really exciting to be here with you all. I'll pass it to Reyn.
Thanks, Ivy. Reyn Akiona. I'm sort of the head of a small organization in the Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley of California called Valley Eco. My background, and you'll hear this bias from time to time, is in restoration ecology. It's still the thing that I'm best at. Occasionally, I get to be a restoration ecologist. But in MLRP land, it actually starts to look a lot more like you start to pick around the edges of policy and all these other technical, like sociology and these like critical elements of the program. But heavy ecological bend, heavy agricultural bend for discussions today. And then I'll hand it off to Abby, I suppose.
Thanks, Reyn. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Hart. I'm a project director with the Nature Conservancy. And I've been involved with MLRP since before the program existed and thinking about these kinds of issues really since close to the inception of SGMA itself, like many others in this room. My personal background is in multi-stakeholder management in agricultural landscapes, so MLRP is like my cup of tea when it comes to the complex people issues, but you'll hear me speak about species and nature and agriculture, but it's really like trying to navigate all the tough people problems that is like the heart of my work. And you'll get to hear a little bit more about that later.
Thank all three of you. Those were great introductions and much better than I could have done. So I think hopefully the participants have a good sense of who's here. So Ivy, let's start with you to provide a little bit of background and some context as we move forward.
So like I said, my name is Ivy McElroy. I'm with Environmental Defense Fund. And all right, here we go. So I wanted to give a little bit of background about water and California's shifting agricultural landscape. We're moving towards groundwater sustainability in the state definitely requires coordinated efforts to balance water supply and demand. In a lot of places of the state, we essentially have too little water to support current agricultural uses. And in many areas of California, reducing demand will unfortunately mean fallowing existing agricultural land. And there was a 2023 PPIC report that estimated that 900,000 acres of agricultural land may have to come out of production in the San Joaquin Valley. And without planning and a vision for this transition, we risk a lot of negative economic and environmental outcomes that are associated with fallowing, such as dust pollution, pests, and weeds. And like David mentioned, SGMA, or the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, was adopted in 2014 to address some of these issues around chronic overdraft, land subsidence, water quality degradation, and other impacts from unsustainable groundwater pumping. And this required the formation of groundwater sustainability agencies, or GSAs, to develop 20-year plans to achieve sustainable groundwater use and avoid a lot of the undesirable results of groundwater overdraft and some high and medium priority basins. So that's just the background of a lot of the struggles California is facing around land fallowing and this shifting agricultural landscape. And I want to share how that kind of led to multi-benefit land repurposing as an alternative path. So multi-benefit land repurposing is the practice of transitioning the least viable irrigated land to new uses that conserve water and deliver new benefits to communities or ecosystems. And this really aims to reduce groundwater reliance and create local and environmental and economic opportunities through land use changes. And there's a lot of examples of what this land repurposing can look like. It can be grazing, solar, dryland crops, cover cropping, creating community and recreational spaces like parks, groundwater recharge basins. There's a lot of opportunities for habitat restoration, like restored habitat corridors, pollinator habitat, and wetland habitat. So lots of options there. And to help level set for today's conversation, I really want to emphasize this, the difference in a few different land repurposing efforts. Specifically, I'll just call it capital MLRP versus lowercase MLRP. So the MLRP program, which I will be talking about, is a program through the Department of Conservation that incentivizes regional efforts to create a positive vision for how fallowing can change conditions in a way that supports continued agricultural activities, while, like I said, providing community and habitat benefits. But there are other land repurposing efforts throughout the state, including those that have multiple benefits. So when we say MLRP, sometimes we're talking about the DOC program, other times we maybe just be talking about other efforts. And like I said, for the purposes of this conversation, I'll be going into DOC's program, but we'll kind of use that as a launching pad to discuss how this program can be used as almost a catalyst, an example of how to scale up lowercase multi-benefit land repurposing throughout the state and beyond. So I hope that's clear for folks, but just wanted to make that clear in the beginning. So I will quickly just share a bit more about the DOC's MLRP program. This is the structure here, and the core of the program has the majority of the funding are these regional block grants here in orange. So well, the first orange, but the core outcome of these grants are implementation projects that will both achieve meaningful outcomes and provide scalable examples for each region. And the outcomes of each of those block grants are really dependent on what grantees are planning, what type of land repurposing is suitable for the region they're in, and they're also doing a lot of education and engaging their communities to ensure that these implementation projects meet the needs of the region. There's also a tribal grantee that DOC is working with. And finally, the statewide support entity, which was created to coordinate among block grantees and build their capacity, also to report on program progress. And I'll share a little bit more about SSE in the next slide, because that's kind of where my role comes into this program. So the SSE is comprised of self-help enterprises, environmental defense fund, and environmental incentives. And like I shared, we help to assist block grantees with a range of activities. We host monthly peer learning sessions. We develop guiding materials to help navigate questions on topics like permitting, project prioritization, and monitoring. And we kind of have this unique opportunity to learn from grantees and bring those lessons learned about what's working and what's not working to the Department of Conservation to adapt the program as needed, because it is a very new program that provides that opportunity to kind of highlight lessons learned, which is part of what today is all about. I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll quickly just share. This is a map of the regionally led block grants and tribal grant, which really allow for customization and strengthen regional capacity. There's 8 subbasins the program is working in across 2 rounds of funding, plus that 1 tribal grant. And this is a quick just figure from our 2025 annual report of MLRP by the numbers. And this annual report seeks to highlight individual project and region accomplishments and kind of aggregate those indicators to capture statewide program impact. So far there's been 9 block and tribal grants funded. There's been 120 plus disadvantaged communities in those regions, and 89 outreach events were held in 2025 that engaged over 1,000 participants. And so far, this program has approved and repurposed over 4,800 acres of irrigated land. And just for those who are more visual like myself, that's equal to about 4 Golden Gate Parks or 7 square miles. And I'll quickly just share some examples of approved projects. So in the Merced Subbasin, there's the Amsterdam Water District, also called the Johnson MLRP project, which will repurpose 15 acres of almond orchard into a groundwater recharge basin paired with pollinator habitat and riparian restoration along Canal Creek. And this project will reduce groundwater demand while actively replenishing the aquifer and restoring habitat through pollinator hedgerows and native riparian vegetation. And this work reflects the Merced Subbasin's broader community-driven approach. In 2025, the subbasin convened its stakeholder advisory committee across 5 meetings to guide project prioritization and hosted dozens of outreach events. In Madera Subbasin, or Madera County, Lavinia project transitioned 5 acres of orchard near the community of Lavinia into pollinator habitat, which helped create a buffer between agricultural operations and nearby residences. And Madera County really received an overwhelming response to their project solicitation and has had a lot of strong community engagement. They've had events like a resource fair and volunteer work days, like the community planting day that's in the image here. And this project, I just want to emphasize as a great example of a project that has smaller acreage, but a large impact for the nearby community. In the Tule Subbasin, Caponera Creek, which I believe Abby will be talking more about, restores 467 acres from irrigated agriculture to upland habitat, reducing groundwater use and supporting sensitive species near the Pixley National Wildlife Refuge. And I think Abby will share some of the cool results, but I'll just say blunt-nosed leopard lizard. Hopefully she'll talk about that, but that is pretty cool. And they've also had some great learning opportunities for high school students. And then lastly, in Pajaro Valley, There's a project called Beach Ranch, which restores 48 acres of coastal habitat while maintaining organic agriculture, improving conditions for important fish species. And over the long term, this project will restore wetland acres over the next decade, and working lands will be maintained for regenerative uses. Okay, last slide here. I just want to share some of the MLRP outcomes that the statewide support entity is tracking. So obviously, sustainable groundwater supply is very important in response to SGMA, but projects also have outcomes of benefiting disadvantaged communities and supporting long-term community resilience. They also support regional partnerships, planning, and implementation capacity, as well as making sure that working lands and rural economies remain viable through land transition strategies. And then there's lastly the healthy functioning ecosystems outcome, which is working on projects restoring habitat, improving biodiversity, and supporting ecosystem health. So these are kind of the multi-benefits that we talk about in MLRP, at least in terms of the DOC program. And I really want to emphasize that multi-benefit aspect. While this program was partly created in response to SGMA, it really focuses on solutions that have benefits to communities or ecosystems, not just groundwater sustainability. And I'll lastly just share that the MLRP program is just one tool in our toolkit to address land transition in California. Like I've said, the program is still very new and growing, but I think it really provides the opportunity to use lessons learned from this program as a kind of a catalyst to set up structures and mechanisms that can help scale up land repurposing and address land transition in California and beyond. So I'll stop there, and I believe I'll be turning it over to Abby to kind of share some of those successes, challenges, and lessons learned in project implementation.
All right. Yeah, so I'm happy to talk a little bit more, and I don't have slides to share because Ivy kind of set me up with Caponero Creek. And I was trying to think of like a few things to say beyond speaking to that project that I hope will like maybe prompt our fishbowl discussion later a little bit, or maybe even the breakout room. So I may just plant some like teasers there for folks to be thinking about. But I'll speak first to the Caponero Creek project and the Tule Subbasin. TNC's been involved there for a long time, and I would say that's a unique subbasin compared to some of the others in a lot of ways because the groundwater conditions are fairly severe. The need for land repurposing is really high, and we actually have some of the last remaining habitat areas for certain species, like some of those last remaining habitat areas on the valley floor. And so TNC's involvement there was really prompted by the opportunity to perhaps transition land not only out of agriculture, but specifically back into habitat that could function for some of these threatened and endangered species. And Caponero Creek, which is owned and managed by the Tule Land and Water Conservation Trust, TNC is one of the supporting partners on that, has turned out to be a really cool example where we were testing a lot of these ideas for the first time. It was a dairy, and these were forage fields that were then transitioned into upland habitat for species. And really excitingly, after transitioning the first phase of the project, we saw endangered species likely coming over from the adjacent wildlife refuge on the site within a year, like within a year, which was faster than we expected. And so one of the like unexpected outcomes is that we had like some extra permitting challenges that we're now navigating to be able to do the remaining phases. But all of these lessons learned are like informing how we go about these sorts of projects in the future. And one of the other things that we found at Caponero, before we went in with the native species, we planted what we called like this background palette of non-native annual grass seeds that are common to what you find in the grasslands on the valley floor. And like I said, they're not native to the region, but in a lot of places they do provide different types of habitat functions. And so as we're thinking about Caponero as one possible example for the Tule Subbasin, and knowing that at least in that subbasin, we have to go from pilot projects like Caponero to really repurposing land at a scale of 20 to 30,000 acres, how do we apply some of these lower cost options like converting first only to grasslands and having that be some kind of stable state for land to be in, while perhaps later the opportunity will exist for further enhancement to more intensive or native habitat on some of those lands, and others can remain really like quality working grazing lands for folks in the region. So it's not just a standalone project. It was always meant to really inform how we do develop and scale up beyond there and the sorts of practices that we would use to do that. And then a few other things I wanted to highlight from the Tule Subbasin, and related in part to like capital case MLRP and both lowercase MLRP. So we have these divergent sets of projects, some that were already envisioned before capital case MLRP came to be, like Caponero Creek. And so MLRP was really effective at channeling funding into them where there were gaps. For projects that need to be envisioned by communities and stood up by partners, those have really long timelines. And in my mind, they're kind of like a different sort of project. Some of the other MLRP block grant teams have developed really successful projects, but the footprints often look really different. The cost structure is often very different, and they take a lot of creative thinking on the part of a lot of partners. And so I really think that that can present a challenge for programs like MLRP or even the water districts who are sometimes tasked with doing this work at huge scales to also then make the case for these very multi-benefit but smaller scale projects that benefit communities. So I just want to present these kind of paradoxes that come when we have these flexible programs that can fund multiple benefits but may struggle in all cases to prioritize or be able to meet everyone's needs, especially when the needs are extreme or very deep. And then I guess the other thing to flag is just that we've learned a lot about the permitting process for some of these habitat type projects, and we'll do our best in the future to try and do more of the transition upfront in a single phase than in these multi-phased approaches, just so that we have perhaps fewer challenges. If species want to come back on site and they're able to do so quickly, then hopefully we have faced fewer hurdles in being able to implement future phases by getting the work done expediently. I think I'll leave it at that for now, since we'll have time to dig into so many of the issues in the fishbowl.
Thank you, Abby. Reyn, why don't you pick this up and kind of lead us to where you've seen the program develop thus far and where you think we might be able to take it.
Yeah, that's all right. Let's do it. So I'm actually going to pick up right on. I'm familiar with Caponero Creek, so I'll pivot a little bit because I think it's a natural segue. I was looking at the names and I see some actually really cool restoration ecologists on this call. Wishing excited for the breakout around the ecology pieces in light of that. But Caponero Creek is just, as an ecologist, the restoration actions on Caponero Creek in isolation are difficult. If you didn't have an entire MLRP framework and it was just, hey, we want to restore Caponero Creek, and you went to the WCB and you built this program and you built it and it was in isolation, it would be difficult. And this hidden nuance, I don't want to make this a Caponero Creek based sort of therapy session. It could easily become that, because restoration is difficult in these landscapes. But it's a perfect example. Like, the complexity at Caponero Creek is actually the perfect example of like hidden complexities within the program. And so if we just like what I'm showing up here is just like a relative framework. I'm breaking the rules of no PowerPoint right now. I apologize. But this is a relatively coarse framework of unpacking what's in an MLRP program. Our team leads, just for context, our team leads the Merced and the Cahuilla programs in Merced County and Tulare County, respectively. Each program kind of has a conceptual framework, or like a hierarchical framework that it executes. Generally, it has to execute simultaneously on all three fronts at the sub-basin level: regional planning, project implementation, and education and outreach. Already programmatically, like, you can get to the realization that there's a lot of complexity within this program. However, this is actually even more complex when you distill this all the way to like on-ground implementation of actions, right? So if we like break out this project implementation into multiple projects, each of those projects gets broken down into like a legitimate like suite of complexities. I'm gonna clear this real quick, that are sort of added, that sort of compound within the program. And this is both the beauty of the program, and the challenge. So within like a habitat framework, right? So just ignoring all those other peripheral programs, right? With just an ecological framework, the MLRP program is simultaneously evaluating how to build wildlife friendly recharge subbasins. Again, there's economics based in here, right? So like one, you have like the hydrology and hydrogeology of how to deploy this. You have all the water infrastructure and policy associated with performing recharge. And then simultaneously, you have these ecological components. Um, Additionally, right, like on a restoration site, this is not Capinera Creek, but on these then you have this unpacking of the ecological lens of like, well, you still have to do the ecological work, which is its own action. Um, and so it challenges sort of within this program, it challenges not just the program managers, but the challenges get segmented down into all program facets, right? Regional planning, right? Like how do we prioritize where land fallowing should occur, right? I mean, that's a dissertation easily within for a PhD student. So where do we fallow within a subbasin? This is a proposed wildlife. This is actually a wildlife corridor that we prioritize in the Merced subbasin. And then even how do you execute your stakeholder outreach, right? So like what is the mechanism by which you enroll stakeholders into your processes? And then all this rolls up into, you might have noticed these are like Frankenstein together. I apologize. I just kind of slapped them on here as we were coming into space. But all this kind of rolls up even one level farther, which gets like sort of into the sociological policy space, which is there is no scaffolding. All this is built, right? All these ground level actions are hard and they're cool and they're wicked and they're awesome independently. But there's no scaffolding like built to begin on. And this is all getting somewhere, I promise, which is the what MLRP does is it provides structure, in my opinion, what it does the best is it provides a framework for everyone, all these complex questions, these economic questions, these land use questions, these execution questions, these governance questions, right? And it provides like a framework that's visible, that can be understood, and that partners can sort of attach themselves to strategically. You can also use it as a mechanism to identify gaps where those partnerships don't exist or sort of technical holes are. And I think I mean, as we go through the discussion today, it's something that I'd really like to kind of open up in the fishbowl, which is like the uniqueness of the program. I mean, it's both its vulnerability, but it's simultaneously its opportunity, which is doing all these things simultaneously and trying to get to like a framework that allows participation and transparency, exchange of information. It's a lot to ask of a single program. But despite the day-to-day headaches at times, I still think this program is the best swing at this type of cohesive sort of landscape change. So David, I don't know where to take the conversation here. I'm inclined to just hand it back to you and
Yeah.
kind of walk us through here.
Now that's fine, Reyn, and I appreciate that. I think you've all done a real good job of framing this up. Let me just say for the workshop participants that what we're going to try to do here is to transition a little bit to take a few layers off of some of the issues that Ivy and Abby and Reyn all introduced. We'll spend a few minutes here, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll invite you, the participants, to join through Q&A or discussion, primarily through Q&A. So if you have some questions, make sure that we know what they are. And again, this is just an observed group conversation. So make some notes as a participant of some things that you'd like us to perhaps respond to, or that answer a question or issue you may bring up, or we can flag that for a breakout session conversation. I guess where I'd like to take the speakers is to talk a little bit about barriers. And Reyn, you talked about vulnerability and opportunity. I think Ivy and Abby both identified some projects, but frankly, from my perspective, they're fairly small. And so I'd be just interested in your thoughts about what needs to happen to address restrictions of scale or collaboration or technology. What what's a barrier that you would like us to try to that you think the program needs to deal with in order to get to those larger scale outcomes that I know we all think we need? And I'll start. I'm not sure who to start with. Ivy, maybe we'll start with you. We'll just do in the order that each of you started. So Ivy, if you'd begin there.
Yeah, big questions. And
Yeah.
the scalability one is the main barrier that I see. I know you're correct, David, that it is they're small. I presented this number in the beginning of 900,000 acres that will need to be transitioned, and then showed that 4,800 have been. That's a very small percentage, which is why I think we wanted to come here today and talk about these issues and talk about how MLRP is a tool in the toolkit, at least the big uppercase MLRP. So the I often think about the scale of investment that's needed to solve the problem, and MLRP isn't the only solution, and it can't be. So that's a barrier I'm always thinking about. Um, I'm also just always thinking about monitoring. That's been, at least on the statewide support entity side, one of the trickiest things. We want to make sure that we're monitoring the outcomes of these projects, to kind of ensure that they're successful and achieving the goals that are set out, which is very tricky to do. And um, I think maybe I'm getting into some of the larger goals of the program. So maybe I'll pause there. I think I'd like to hear from Reyn and Abby, as they're more of the practitioners on the ground. I have this like very zoomed out level of MLRP, so I'd love to hear from them and then and capture ideas from there.
Yeah, and I would invite all three of you to take this thread for a few minutes. So thank you, and Abby or Ren, react as you feel appropriate.
Yeah, I have distinct thoughts, and Ren and I, well, we talked about this a little bit in our prep call, but funding so often comes up as one of the barriers for working at scale, and it certainly is, but I don't want to get stuck there. The part that I really do want to highlight, though, is that I feel like many other state agencies or funders in general believe that Department of Conservation has kind of the cost or the capacity, like that they've sort of designated that program to address this issue. And they don't necessarily see a role for their own agencies or organizations in kind of linking arms and supporting from a funding perspective this big challenge that we have toward multi-benefit land repurposing. And what I mean by that is like perhaps the mandate of that particular agency could be achieved in a more cost-effective fashion if it wasn't linked with other benefits. And in linking with those other benefits, the projects becomes less competitive for any funding program related to these other agencies. And I think as a state and for those agencies, we will need them to begin thinking in different ways and like thinking about their shared responsibilities, especially when for those of us inside MLRP, it's widely acknowledged to be a pilot program with really limited scope to do this at scale. So I think there needs to be some like understanding and shared agreement on the part of the state about the role of the program versus our shared role as citizens of California and, what we need to do. And then I guess some of the other barriers, I think, in most subbasins, I believe there is an acknowledgement present at least, but there are still subbasins I think are lagging on acknowledging the issues or challenges that exist, and therefore like their openness to the types of solutions that will need to be applied, but less so year by year. And then one of the biggest challenges I think that the Tule subbasin will face and that I see could happen anywhere the need is great is, MLRP often gets talked about as like, what can an individual landowner do on their own property, and less about this much bigger problem that is at a scale of this size, entire properties, entire massive acreages are going to need to change ownership to support the type of management that it will be under. Like a farmer is not going to want to hold 20,000 acres of habitat, likely. That seems very unlikely. And so how do we prepare stakeholders for navigating this massive change in land ownership and all of the structures that need to go along with that? I think that becomes a really complicated challenge that I see.
Reyn,
Yeah,
thoughts?
yeah, definitely. I kind of go back into agency buy-in a little bit, but I'll hold on that momentarily and maybe like check in on like sociological backdrop. And this, I think Abby's like kind of getting to it with like each subbasin is in a different space. Like it is actually a pretty like phenomenal, like I hope this information right gets captured in textbooks and finds its way down sort of through time. But it is a phenomenal sociological study. It's where like within a basin, right? And I think that there's an art candidly within certain subbasins, which is like within a basin, we have, and almost for sake of simplicity, we have water, right? So this resource of water, and it's pulled by like the agricultural economic sector, and we have water pulled by the like being pulled on by disadvantaged community and community representation, and we have like pools and almonds, right? Somebody in that right vein. But the so at a very local level, right, we have like to manage a space that weighs the relative polarity of that region to tend to pull on that singular resource, right? And this is at a local level challenging, but it can also, right, this is the flip side, which is it also can be very fruitful because people can identify themselves within this framework and how they're pulling on that asset, and they can see why other entities are pulling on that sort of resource. And so it provides an interesting paradigm, like, and then that moves all the way up through the state, right? Which gets to a hazard, I guess, which in the MLRP program, which is, I think it's always on the edge of this needle, right? Which is, it could tip into, not that it's a poor deployment of the program, but it can tip into, this is a farmer incentive program, period. End of sentence, right? Which is a great use of the program, but it is very singular, right? Or this can turn into just like community benefit program, right? And it takes very little energy at a local level and at like at a state level to tip it in either direction. And Wendell, I do see your comment there, and I do agree, and maybe we'll talk more about that. And so the social dynamic is really tenuous, and I don't know how that puts a lot of burden, I guess, at the ground level to maintain that balance, and ultimately that burden needs to continue to move upward. The cross agency buy-in, I just want to hand it back to you, Abby, here on that note. Like, there's not enough resources in MLRP, and when you don't have enough resources, it becomes about efficiency to get to scalability, right? And those pathways, we talk about this in landscape change pretty regularly, which is like increase technical ability, change your metrics. So like I'm a purist in restoration ecology, use the right genetics for your plants, like go collect them, grow them out. Like I'm the worst purist in this genetic, like in restoration. But functionally, we need to get to practices that are more succession driven, that are more that are imperfect, that are acceptable, and we need to start getting to places where agencies are not in each other's way. And so, Ivy, I'm kind of curious if you are seeing examples of ways where, like, either through permitting and cross agency investment, there are opportunities for, yeah, if you're seeing sort of opportunities for like shared permitting processes or shared costs.
Yeah, great question. I think on the permitting side, less so that I've seen. There's obviously some shared funding opportunities, but that's very tricky for a lot of grantees, especially smaller orgs like Abby. I know the Nature Conservancy has had some shared funding for the Caponero Creek project, but that might be harder for some other grantees to be able to seek out those sources of funding. And that's part of our role as the statewide support entity to share that. But I agree that cross-agency collaboration has been one of the trickiest parts of this program. And the program is so new, so there's definitely a need for folks to recognize that DOC and this program can't do it all, and there should be some sharing there. Abby, is there anything else you wanted to add to that? Because I wanted to address Wendell's comment as well and just share some of those local barriers.
Yeah.
No, jump into Wendell's comment and then
Yes.
I'm sure it'll get back to me. Don't worry.
Yeah, great. Yes, agreed. I wish we could have gotten a landowner perspective today. And obviously, that's one of the huge challenges of finding landowners who are really interested in this program. I think something I'm always also kind of worried about is ensuring that people don't get lost in this transition, especially agricultural workers. So that's another barrier to making sure that there is some form of workforce development and that folks aren't left behind in this transition that is frankly going to happen because of climate change. But how can we just ensure a just transition? So that's definitely another impact and barrier that I'm always thinking of as well. Abby, Reyn, anything to add there?
One of the things lately I have been speaking with a lot of landowners just about their intentions for their property going forward because they seem to be like, exploring a million futures at once, trying to understand whether they keep their business the same, whether they explore a different business opportunity, whether they sell, like they've got a lot of different options that they're trying to like calculate at the same time. And what I do hear consistently, which I think varies by district and sub-basin, is that it's just nearly impossible to make decisions when the conditions are so volatile and changing constantly. So like, local policy from the GSAs is changing. They had these ramp down schedules, but because of like, probation and other issues, these like what schedule you're on is changing year by year. A lot of people are finding out their allocations or finding out if they're in violation via like fee letters from their GSAs. That's like a primary outreach strategy. So the volatility of all the conditions, everything, including like the value of their land itself to like conditions outside of the groundwater space, make it super challenging for anyone to be able to calculate whether they're making a wise decision, let alone for the next year, let alone for like the next generation or whatever of their family. So that's something I hear across the board.
Reyn, any observations here?
Yeah, I'd like to bend a little bit this conversation, right? Because it is so like multifaceted. I kind of want to be like, oh, I want to talk about permitting, but I actually want to acknowledge Wendell's comments in the chat and some of this landowner-based candid just pain, right? Like the like that just can we call it that now? Which is that they're in this we're in a challenging space. Like we want to drive MLRP in a context of advancing, right? This is an opportunity to advance our ecological footprint. This is an opportunity to advance connectivity and advance water stability and advance community engagement and water resources. And there's pain here. And this is the sociological context that I think is really critical to understand as folks get into like, why is this like why is uptake bad or why does something as good as like MLRP bringing money into a space result in conflict? And that is there is a backdrop of the pain of adapting to a new situation. Growers that like I've gotten calls from growers it is like you can almost follow latitudinally across the San Joaquin Valley as you go up like the stages of engagement with this challenge of Sigma, right? And I'm not even pointing at the policy. What it is like a social adjustment in a really short timeline creates like a backdrop. One grower that I thought was infallible, like one of the best farmers, like we'll go out there. I'm like why did you space your triticale like this extra like quarter of an inch, right? Why did you adjust your seed drill? And like why are you like that level of, well, why did you mix this into your forage, right? Like that type of high resolution type grower, like with detail, focusing on water, like I'll get calls from people like that will say, I'm doing this and I can't math it out, right? Like I can't do this. And I'm not even saying that MLRP is the mechanism or even can address, even at a scaled deployment, address that pain. But it's like an important context because in all this, like MLRP has so many cool things in it. In all of that, right? It's kind of caught in this larger current economically, right? And socially of like a grower community that has operated a certain way. Um, yeah, and I guess I wanted to, I guess I just feel like it needs to be acknowledged. And when these things turn into a friction, when they like pop up, these little fires like pop up, that underlying friction is just there, right? And folks just shouldn't be surprised by it. And then sometimes they are, and it's just like, hey, there's a lot in here that is not MLRP related, right? Or like it's not directly. So I don't know. Abby, I know something, and the Tuli is in a lot of pain, candidly. It does deal with these like rapid shifts in water allocations and like the it's not a fault, right? It's not a fault of anyone.
Yeah.
It is challenging scenario.
GSAs that come and go and reorganize. We have in writing our MLRP plan, I have to write in a different number of GSAs every time I redo the draft. No, but it's like it speaks to the depth of the challenge that there's a lot of fracturing, reconfiguring, and everyone trying to sort this out. I did want to address the small farmer participation alongside the landowner because challenge that came up in the chat because I do think it's related. And small farmers are extremely difficult to engage in MLRP in most cases. Both they're less likely to be engaged with their GSAs to begin with in many cases, and then they're less likely to be involved in MLRP. And simply from like a mathematical perspective, for a small landowner or operator to stay in business, we would almost need agreement across the subbasin that we would like to subsidize such landowners. And so when MLRP was created, the statute sort of said like, oh yeah, and smallholder farmers like make sure they have a place without specifying the means by which that was supposed to happen, and really without folks saying small farmers should get to have the right to just use more water than everyone else. It's very challenging to figure out how you protect them from going out of business in these scenarios. For example, if a small farmer happens to be in a heavily subsided area, those areas are most restricted on their pumping up until like perhaps no pumping at all. And I don't know how a landowner, small or otherwise, that happens to be overlying that area gets to stay in business. And so I think it's better to be honest about the impacts and understanding that like these types of outcomes are like some of the negative consequences that will come from implementing this law than to try like that landowner, there is no remedy basically for that landowner in MLRP that I can see. And so I think it's better just to be honest about that.
Yeah,
Let me,
Abby.
Avi, let me weigh in here just real quick, and
Mhm.
then I'll give it back to you. Just for the participants, we're down to about 10 minutes before we're going to move to breakout. So a number of you have offered up some questions that we've already started to try to respond to. We're going to continue to do that. So if some of you others have been waiting and want to weigh in, now's the time. I want to continue this conversation about land use and grower size and participation, but I'm going to invite others to weigh in with questions if they're compelled. So sorry for that. I'm going to jump at about 10 after to transition to breakouts. So Ivy.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly emphasize Abby's point on, I mean, MLRP is such a new program and there's lots to learn. And I think that small growers were not captured in conception. It's really hard to get them. I know DOC has been working on some new guidelines and some specific funding for small farmers that is still in the planning process, but I believe there will be dedicated project funding. But I'm interested to see how that will play out. I still think it'll be very, very hard to capture small farmers in this program. And I think maybe it's important to recognize that's why MLRP, like I've been saying, isn't the only solution. And we can use it to think of how this program hasn't captured small growers and how we can capture them in other ways and make sure that they're represented in further land repurposing efforts and just the land transition in general.
I see that there's a question here about changes or solutions within the program that could help. And we had talked a little bit about maybe going down the path of looking forward 5 years. What what do you all envision could be the outcome here, and what needs to happen in the meantime or to achieve that? I know that's a pretty big question, and we'll probably have some time in breakout to go there too. But the three of you, if you talk a little bit about where you see the opportunities going forward, and how do we deal with these landowner issues, scale problems? What's your dream here in 5 years?
I see so many good questions popping up in the chat. It's like,
Yeah.
but we can stay on this for a while. You know, for me, I don't know if I would call it my dream, but I can tell you where things are headed in the Tule Subbasin, and it is more toward an incentive-based program for landowners to plug into. But I think it'll be a streamlined set of practices that look like basically turning land to grasslands or upland habitat, but a pretty simplified version of that. And then I think there will, like, I worry about where longer term, like, community planning efforts lie in that framework. I'm not sure where they fit. One of the other things I wanted to address is, like someone mentioned, recharge, and MLRP as a program has funded really successfully recharge pilot projects. But at least in the Tule Subbasin, recharge will solve 3% of the water problems that we have. So if we focus all of our energy on recharge, we will have really missed the opportunity and the need that exists in the subbasin. I suspect a lot of other subbasins are at least closer to that 97% than to like being solved 100% by recharge. So I'll throw that out there as a, like, don't get distracted by like the shiny object that is groundwater recharge. And I hope long term that we at least get to stable water allocations, basically like a more stable version of being able to understand what we have to offer and how folks can benefit or how they navigate the system. I think if in 5 years we just get to a more stable system, we'll be able to like work with landowners on a much more level playing field and have much more ease of bringing people into the program and helping them navigate the opportunities that exist.
I'm going to touch on some very specific Jesse planning and landscape like questions here. I'm going to just kind of I just happen to have that up because it's just who I am. So there are, I just want to quickly break the notion that deployment of MLRP is ad hoc, right? Or relatively like random. How the program, although each subbasin builds their own criteria, whether it's spatially or they're prioritizing different variables. Each subbasin has gone about it a different way. There's a similar tool to this, both in the Merced and in the Tule subbasin, and there's a GRAT-related tool in Eastern Turlock. But for example, programs, right, depending on how they're built, can leverage tools to, in this case, this is a CLIA tool, right? So a user could be an agency, could be a farmer. Actually, farmers will get in here and they like the solar overlay, but they could be getting in this tool as well and identifying like what suitable MLRP actions could even play. So like, yeah, in this particular framework that I'm showing on the right side, right, the program prioritization would be prioritizing agricultural outputs. This is something of a misnomer that we'll talk about in a little bit, largely because of downstream economies. But right, and it also prioritizes in this model that I'm building for today. like a 25% weighting on recharge variables and a 25% on environmental risk mitigation. I only show this not because it's lots of colors, but I show it primarily because it's just an answer to a question that I see threaded through here, which is on watershed important, like how do we do this in a way that is taking watershed into consideration and sort of not like a random acts of cool things approach. Yeah.
Let's see if any of the three of you have any final points you want to try to offer for framing the breakouts. That would be a good spending of the next 4 or 5 minutes. So
Yeah,
Ivy, maybe we'll start with you.
yeah. I just quickly also wanted to add to zoom out to my general vision for MLRP,
Yeah.
which obviously more funding for the DOC MLRP program would be great. I would definitely love to see the program scaled more. I'd love to have demonstrated success of these projects so we can kind of prove this return on investment. I think a lot of these projects are still very new, but I think I'm feeling the pressure at least to show those successes. So I'd love to have that. I think I also just want to emphasize how great this program is in addressing regional needs. We've touched on that a lot, but I know there was a question here about the watershed approach. And California is so interesting because there's such a variability in watersheds and watershed flows. I think it's like the greatest daily flow of our watersheds surpasses the least daily flow by something like 500 times. I might be somewhere around that number. So I think the I would love to see more projects just addressing those regional needs, addressing community needs. And I think I'll just add that in places like the San Joaquin Valley, I'd love to see how we can kind of address how important the agricultural footprint is, or just this people in the Central Valley, agriculture is so important to who they are. So I think just seeing how we can make sure they're still involved in these processes 5 years later and we're getting community input, that's definitely something I'd like to see in 5 years. And David, you mentioned, I've lost the thread on connecting this to the breakouts. So maybe I'll pause there.
Well, no, I think that's one of our potential breakout topics. So I think you've queued that up to perhaps those on the workshop that want to talk about that conversation a little bit further. I think it would be interesting to frame how this program moves to again, my question about scale was intentional, is how do we think about this bigger than 15 acres here and 400 acres there, that sort of thing. So Debbie Franco, I'm going to pass this to you. For those of you who don't know, Debbie is our executive officer at Watershed Solutions Network. I think she's going to spend a few minutes orienting the breakout group process, and then we'll transition there. And then hopefully we'll come back a few minutes before 2 with some breakout group reports and some conversation about where we go from there. So Debbie, if I can hand this to you, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dave, and thanks to all of our presenters. My brain, I have to say, I feel like it's overflowing right now. So this is a great time to shift gears and to start talking about and working with the information. And I do think for those of you who have been interested in getting to like where are there opportunities to solve some of the challenges, join the breakouts. So we have structured the breakouts around topics, and you will be able to choose the topic you want to join. You will also have the flexibility to jump out of a breakout and to join a different one. And I encourage folks, especially if the one you initially join is really big and you had a second topic that you were also interested in, you might shift around. The topics that we have identified are for group 1, technical challenges facing MLRP. So that'll be a conversation focused on, pulling together your best list of challenges that folks are facing on the ground as they're trying to implement the program. And I think the group has intended that to be both MLRP capital M MLRP specific to the DOC program, but also MLRP, lowercase MLRP, and the larger array of activities that are happening around land repurposing. The second group will be focusing on expanding access to funding for MLRP, both big capital M projects and lowercase m projects. And this group will be, and I'm hoping Abby is going to participate in this group. This group will be talking about opportunities to figure out how to tackle the problem she described, where it's hard to make these projects competitive in other programs if they're focused specifically on, let's say, recharge. And so really talking through like how could this, could there be some kind of larger funding strategy? Group 3 will be focused on how MLRP is part of the watershed. I just want to remind everyone that watersheds start from the headwaters and go to the outflow. And in California, we've done this magical thing of engineering connections across natural watersheds. So from our perspective, we consider all of that part of a watershed. And so I'm really excited to hear, it's very, very aligned with our work at WSN. Excited to hear conversations about how MLRP projects in the program more generally can be more integrated into watershed function. I also suspect it's one of the lines that might take us toward an integrated funding strategy, but I'll be interested to hear what the breakout participants can come up with. And then for folks who may be less familiar with the program or who are really interested in digging into how this program might relate or come to fruition in your own work, we have breakout group number 4. So that group, please show up there if you're really interested in figuring out where the connectivity is between the MLRP program and other activities you may be engaging in. We have a shorter time than we expected for the breakout groups, so it is 1:11 right now. I think we're going to give you 30 minutes in the breakouts. If you scroll down to the bottom of the breakout instruction page, you'll see there's a long list of, there's a discussion guide and lots of questions. If your group falls silent and you're looking for more things to talk about, scroll down there. But otherwise, I have a feeling that as you join your groups, you're going to have plenty to talk about. We are asking you to come back with short, so like 3-minute max presentations back to the group. We'll let you select, if there are really important insights you've gained in the group conversation, please bring those. But at a minimum, we'd like you to tell us who was in your group, an insight that surprised your group, one important tension that deserves continued attention, one opportunity to strengthen the MLRP moving forward, and any ideas for future workshops or conversations that could help move us forward on how we're implementing MLRP in California. Welcome back, folks. Let's see, does it look like we have everyone back? I think we do. All right, thanks everyone for participating in the breakouts. We really appreciate you all taking the time to dig into the information materials, and I can't wait to hear what exciting and interesting things you all came up with when you were talking with each other. We're not going to do anything fancy here. We're just going to go through the groups in the order that we assigned them. So I would love to know who the presenter is for group number 1, technical challenges facing MLRP.
We were in it. We barely assigned a facilitator, so I'll just do it unless someone else wants to take over. Just real quick, I think there were a couple themes. I tried to get the group to themes. Generally, there seemed to be like a hidden challenge around process and contracting and even like agency processes. So like even like agency actions or interactions between the department and the like administrators, like communications, technical, like what are the technical needs and permitting needs of these requirements to get them funded securely by the department, and those seem to present themselves in a couple of different ways. There are also a lot more. I'm glad that it showed up in this space because it's on my mind a lot, which is a lot more challenges around contracting with the growers. So like I thought maybe it was a unique paradox that we were facing or paradigm that we were facing. But it seems like negotiating with growers in such a flexible environment can also be pretty challenging. I have a couple other things thematically, though I kind of probably over distilled this down, but I kind of just like summarized everything into my interpretation, which is like we need to find mechanisms to like decrease fear in the space, find mechanisms to and this is on both sides of every transaction, right? Decrease fear, de-risk the de-risk environment, simplify and increase transparency on process. Um, any other thoughts from our team? I apologize for just running us through that. There was a lot of good stuff, obviously, sort of nested within those concepts. All right, cool. Thanks everyone from the technical group. Amazing team. Maybe the best working team. I don't know.
Now we're on to group number 2. How are we going to fund this? Who is your presenter?
I think I am presenting. I couldn't coax anyone else to do it. And we didn't assign a scribe. So you don't have notes from our team. But I think in summary, so we talked about how I think our conversation touched a bit on how, like, perhaps no state priority or state funding program feels like it's exactly like flush with funds and has like more than enough to meet its mandate. And so that is like part of where the challenge comes from, that like no one feels like they have a lot to like meet other objectives beyond their own. And so while like they can support sort of politically or conceptually, financial support is challenging to share. That's like a very broad brush summary. We kind of touched on flood because so our group members were Anissa, David, and Kayla, and me. And then I think one of the tensions that got our attention, and honestly, like, it's not that it surprised me, but I guess I kind of lost sight of it myself, was part of what predicated the legislation and got us to where we were with groundwater is local entities and landowners and such, agricultural stakeholders buying and requesting local control. And now that they've got it, they don't really want to also hold the responsibility of local funding. They would like state funding. So there's this constant tension of the balance of powers between local and state actors, and like kind of struggling for the struggle between those parties is like also playing out on the funding front in a sense. So and I think unless any of the members want to share any other thoughts, that's it for our group.
We did not have a group number 3, which people are not interested in watersheds apparently, which is very disappointing. I think we will, WSN will try to continue to trigger that conversation. But because we did not have a breakout group on that topic, we're going to jump to group number 4. How does MLRP relate to your work? Who is the presenter in that group? And thank you to group number 4. I do see that you all took notes in the document.
Yeah, I think I can hop in and just chat about what we talked about. Our wonderful scribe Renata did have to jump off, so I cannot take any credit for the notes here. But I can kind of summarize the notes, and anyone else who wants to jump in, feel free. I'm glad she took notes because I was having Zoom issues in joining the group. So this was great. But we had Renata, Angela, Carson, Violet, Christina, Jordan, and myself. And we had some great questions. Folks had really great questions just more about MLRP because they're less familiar with the program, a lot of folks. So that was really helpful for me because I got to just answer some of those and think about how to communicate this program. Something that really came up in terms of tension was the tensions with landowners and these compounding issues that they're facing with development pressures, Sigma compliance, and how they have folks who want to, buy their land for data centers, for example, and how that might be probably more profitable for them than MLRP, but how to kind of address those issues, or like how solar could be an example. And obviously farmers want to stay farming, so we talked about that. and how MLRP can kind of help address some of the tensions that landowners are facing and address their needs as well as community needs and try to kind of reach compromises between the two. We also just talked about how it's not taking, I think it can seem like MLRP is taking a farmer's entire tract of land out of production, but oftentimes it's just a smaller tract that is least viable. So how they can kind of think through that and basically still keep farming if that's what they'd like to do, but address all these other tensions that they're facing. And in terms of strengthening MLRP moving forward, we talked about just the need moving forward for just transition and making sure critical stakeholders like small growers and agricultural workers are kind of their voices are heard and brought to the table, and that can kind of help strengthen the next round of funding. So that was the main thing that we talked about, and just some fun questions about how funding works, timeframes, all of that. Anything else folks want to add?
Ivy, I see in your notes it says interagency is critical to achieve optimal outcomes. Can you
Yes.
say a little more about that?
I didn't take that specific note if anyone else wants to add, but I think we were just adding to the points that Abby had brought up in the beginning that we needed. That was another tension of making sure that DOC is not the only agency addressing these issues, and how if we operate in silos, it can be pretty detrimental. So I think that was the main point that was brought up.
Great. Thank you all. I'm going to hand it off to Dave to close us out.
Well, thank you, all of you who have stayed for the breakout and the input. That's been very, very helpful. I want to thank everybody who has stayed with us to the end. Want to thank the presenters, Ivy, Abby, Reyn. Great job. I think everybody appreciates the work that you're doing here, and the issues are very complex, as we learned through the last hour and a half or 2 hours. I also want to recognize Debbie and Team Watershed Solutions Network, because there's a lot of work went into this, and appreciate all of your effort as well. I think there's going to be recording and links mailed out here in about a week, as I understand, and then just call attention to the next workshop, which will be, as Angelica pointed out, the fourth week of August, the 27th. We'll have a workshop on the keeping water in our streams, the in-stream flow dedication under Water Code 1707. So anything else? I think we have a survey that's going to go in the chat that we ask everybody to respond to. And with that, if I've missed anything, Debbie or Angelica, bring it up. Otherwise, we'll convene the workshop, and thank you all.